Yes, I didn't.
It just has a little.
I tried to in the elder meeting. I just could not get to.
They are in the afternoon session as well, though.
Yes, I'll fix them for the afternoon. So this one, John will feed us the questions. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Welcome today to Waterbrook Bible Fellowship, and it is our annual retreat. This is typically, Dan, our retreat weekend. We're doing it differently this year, and so we had to go all virtual because of not being able to get everyone. You can't hear me now. Seriously, we heard me beforehand and can't hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Clearly, I don't know which is mute and which is unmute. Thanks for those who were telling us online before we went live here that you could hear us on the mic. Dan, I was just saying that usually this is our retreat weekend where we get our key leadership team together and we talk about vision, we talk about new trends, we talk about where are we going, what's been happening, we talk about the things that matter to us. And so one of the things that I think is as we've had to change this year and go virtual, we've invited some others in. So I know we have some online guests. We have other leaders beyond who would typically be here on campus. And we're doing this in a different format. It's not the way I prefer. I would rather be in a group with all of our leaders, but it's so important that we are here this year. I'm Jeff Denton, lead pastor here at Waterbrook. With me is Dan Carnifex, our elder chairman here at Waterbrook. Dan, how long have you been part of Waterbrook as a family? How long have you guys been here? And do you know how long you've served now on the elder council?
I believe we started coming to Waterbrook in 2005, so we've been coming here about...
You need to hold your mic up, maybe?
Yeah. And he said that there's no sound.
Okay.
Well, let's see. Imagine that the sound guy can't get his microphone.
Dan just said,
Let's see if that's a little better. My wife and family and I have been attending Waterbrook since 2005, so we've been coming here for 16 years, I think, if my math serves me correct. And I believe I've been a part of the elder team since about 2010. So it's been about 10, maybe 11 years.
Okay, you have served in some different roles on the Elder Council. Most recently, you've been the chairman of the elders. And Dan, just from a leadership perspective, you and I have walked through some tough times. I mean, there have been some issues that were just really, really difficult to deal with. And I appreciate your leadership in those moments where we've tried to remain sensitive to what the Lord is doing, sensitive to how He's leading. And I would say because we chose to make good decisions in that moment, that we saw God bless. I'm thinking of one thing, and you know what I'm thinking of. I think when it was just very troubling, and we both spent time crying about it, and by no fault of our own, and sort of Waterbrook was drug into a situation that was rough, and we didn't react inappropriately. We really asked the right questions. We really figured out what direction do we want to go, and it wasn't easy, but it led to. Our goal all along was, we want to get to a place where healing can happen, and healing can't happen if you overreact the wrong way. And so I appreciate your leadership in those times. We're going to talk this morning in our morning session here, in this first session, we're going to talk about making good decisions. I don't know if you've ever made bad decisions.
Oh,
and we've...
Maybe not today. Yet.
I hope not. But we want to talk about that a little bit. We're also joined by Pastor John Robbins, who is the student ministry pastor here at Waterbrook. And Pastor John, we're glad that you're here today.
Yep, let's see if my mic works. Thomas, you got my mic?
Okay.
Hey, student pastor.
Excellent. Student pastor has everything working. That's good. Well, we want to talk about, and it's a book that that's a really good book that I gave all of our leaders, our elders, our staff, some other key leaders. This book, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets, and what's the tagline there? 5 questions to help you determine your next move. And I think this is a book, this is how impressed I was when I read this book and decided our leadership team needs to see this, needs to read it. I think this is a book for students, for parents, for young adults, for older adults who maybe have made some bad decisions in their life, for anyone who's facing what happens next. I think this is an excellent book. It's a really short little read and very easy to read, and I highly recommend it. So now I'm going to say this as well. For those who don't have a copy of the book, you can obviously go on and buy it wherever books are sold. But also, and we'll put these links on a little bit later, you can hear these the 6 chapters that are in this book, you can hear them presented in a sermon series that Andy Stanley has done at North Point Church in Georgia, his church, and both the videos and the audio podcast are all available of what we're going to talk about today, and I highly recommend that. Now, what I want to do today is talk about these 5 questions, but I want to talk about them maybe from a church perspective, from a leadership perspective. Anyone should read this book, and you can apply it to personal stuff, to parenting, to a kid trying to figure out what to do, good ways to make decisions. But how do we as leaders employ good decisions? And so let's jump in with that discussion.
Okay.
And Pastor John, I think you're going to help us hit what some of those questions are, right?
I am. So the like you said, the book has 5 questions, and so the first question is called Andy Stanley calls it the integrity question, which is, am I being honest with myself? And then he has a pause there and he says, really? Like, am I really being honest with myself? And so I know that the book was written more as an individual, but we want to take it as a church. So how does that apply to the church? Are we being honest with ourselves? And then before you answer that, really, or are we being honest with ourselves?
And I think something that really hit me on it is, I think what he's getting at with that question is, tell yourself, or in our case, tell our church, the unfiltered truth. We're good at lying to ourselves. And what he's getting at is, be honest. Admit, what are you really trying to accomplish with this? And I think that applies in a church setting. When we've got a decision coming up and we're trying to make it, what are we really trying to get at? Are we just trying to take the easy way out, just try to make it go away? Or are we trying to figure out what is the right thing to do, what is the best thing to do, instead of worrying about the consequences or whatever has us trying to lie to ourselves?
I think, and the point that he makes very early in the book is that we deceive ourselves most of the time, is that if someone asks us a question, we feel personally challenged. I don't go, hey, thank you very much for helping me not to make a bad decision. I'm like, why are you questioning me in this area? And especially a lot of church leaders do that. We don't like to be questioned. I'm an expert in my area. The youth pastor is an expert in youth ministry. That whatever it is, we don't like to be questioned. It makes us uncomfortable. It makes us maybe feel inferior. It makes us feel like we don't know. Are you saying I don't know what I'm talking about? When the reality is we all need people in our lives who will do that. Now here at Waterbrook, we actually have a culture, and we have what we call grace challenges, is what we refer to them as. And we try, and even in our staff meetings, and this happens in elder meetings as well, where we say we want to be open to questions, that it's okay to ask questions. In fact, I would rather be asked a question up front and avoid a problem down the road than someone go, oh, I shouldn't ask the lead pastor a question. I shouldn't challenge. If he thinks this is a good idea, we shouldn't challenge it. And then afterwards go, oh, I knew that was going to go bad the whole time. I mean, we want to avoid that, and I think that's why that's so important. And I think with this question, when you pause and go, really, because we deceive ourselves a lot. And if I have a great idea, I just got a great idea, here's what it is. And to say, but have you really thought this through? Is this, is there anything here that you aren't being honest with?
Right.
That you aren't talking about? And I think that's so important. We're so often, it's easy to not be honest with ourselves, and that happens when we make non-biblical things equal with theology. When we do that, we're not being honest, really. I'm going, no, this matters because it matters to God. Well, that's not biblical. It matters to you, and in a church. Youth ministry matters to Pastor John. That is paramount to what he cares about. I want him to come to the table and to feel like youth ministry is the most important thing, because that's what his focus is. Pastor Ween with children's ministry, Pastor Don with missions and worship, Pastor Stephen with the Word of God. We want to all come to the table and have a passion, and whatever your passion is, we should be able to talk about that. But then we need to know, at the end of the day, is that the most important thing in this moment? If we're making a decision about what we're going to do this Sunday, maybe in that discussion, youth ministry isn't the most important thing. Now, John's going to make a case that it is, and his job depends on it, and of course he has a passion for that, but if we can't ask those honest questions, am I being honest really? Is this the most important thing? In this moment, I also think it is possible that we have tradition and we're not being honest with ourselves because we let a tradition take the place of what is true.
This is what we've always done.
Yeah.
We have to keep doing that.
Right, that we make traditions an absolute. And when you do that, you're not being honest. Well, this is what we have to do. No, probably not. We've had that with home teams this year. They've always been home teams, that's what we call them. And we suddenly had a realization, we're like, okay, no one's getting together in homes, during the pandemic. And we're trying to get people to get into a home team. We're calling them the wrong things. Well, that's what we've always called them. We have home team directors. We'll have to remake name tags if we call them something different. But we were challenged, and someone said, you have to call them something different because no one's going to join a home team. Don't get stuck in the tradition and say, but this is what we do, and this is what everybody knows it as. So we started calling it life groups. to be honest with you, we still go back and forth. But we don't want to be tied to things that aren't doctrinal. And we'll talk later in our distinctives. We say one of our distinctives is a fluid culture, and many churches would say that, but they're lying to themselves because they really aren't open to how God would move them, because they make everything a doctrinal issue. And I would say it's also, one of the things that falls within this, as I read the book, was there are a lot of churches right now that are making decisions to sustain themselves. In other words, there may be some things that are not the wise decision, and I say, well, this is what God wants us to do. And we got to get back and we got to do it exactly the way we were before, because that's the way God wants church to work. And I'm reading through Scripture going, we don't get some of those things, are not in Scripture. This is just how we do it. It's how we know. It's how I was trained. So I feel like this is the right way. But some of those things aren't doctrinal.
We don't like being uncomfortable.
Right, and so this first question is so important, this integrity. Am I being honest with myself, really? Am I being honest with why this motivates me? As a pastor, and I've talked to other pastors, obviously offerings matter to me. It's how we pay salaries. It's how we do mission work. And so that does play into decisions, but I got to be able to let that go if that's the primary driving force behind my decisions. And I think that to make decisions, in attorney briefings and ministry blogs, I've been reading about pastors who are making decisions they feel are wrong, but are the decisions they need to make to sustain their church during a hard time. And I sure don't want us to be that way.
Which kind of goes to something that he said in the book, which is, one of the things that I took from it was decisions are never made in an emotionally neutral environment. And understanding that emotions, especially in a decision like that, whether it's personally or even as a church, that we want to make decisions in an emotional environment when we can't think. And that's, to me, the whole point of the ... really, because it makes us have to pause and go, no, perspective, sit down, talk to other people, pause, because if we make it based on emotions, it's going to lead us down a road that we are going to look back on with regrets.
Right. Absolutely. Are you making a decision out of fear? Now, the thing is, and I'll say this from a counseling perspective, I just recently had a guy say to me, well, I'm not emotional, so I don't make decisions emotionally. And I would say, yes, you do. Because by saying you're not emotional, you have no idea how emotional that statement is. It's so loaded that when we think we're not being emotional, many times we are, which is why the ... really, after you ask yourself, are you being honest? Yes. No. Really? Are you being honest?
Yeah, he's got a whole list of, am I being honest with myself? Really? Why am I doing this? Really? Why am I postponing this? Really? And he just goes on and on with, really, is that really why you're doing this or not doing this?
And often it doesn't mean that you don't have the right motives, but by pausing it gives you a chance to sit and think and go, okay, no, I am really doing this for the right thing. We've done that a lot this year with COVID and trying to figure out what matters, what doesn't matter, what do we do next? And so I think that's been something that we've tried to put in practice a lot this year, specifically at Waterbrook, is, okay, why are we doing this? What matters and why?
We do a term similar to this at work called a sanity check. It's when you think, I've got the plan of action to fix this particular issue, and you go to someone and you go, this is what I'm thinking. Tell me I'm wrong, poke holes at my theory of what's wrong. And it's am I going down the right path or not?
And I would say one of the lines I appreciated from the book is he says this, and this is just common sense, but I needed to read this. You rarely have to convince yourself of a good idea. If you hear yourself in your mind convincing yourself, or I'm having to convince my wife of something, or other members of staff, and everyone else seems to think this is a bad idea, but I am so committed to it, you rarely have to convince yourself of a good idea. You know a good idea when you see it. If you hear yourself trying to convince yourself to do something, whether it's a relationship, a decision in ministry, what I'm going to do this weekend, if you're hearing yourself talk yourself into it, that needs to be a warning flag that says, this may not be a good idea.
When you go purchase a car, why do they not want you to leave and come back the next day?
Right?
Yeah.
It's really
Why
good.
do they not want you to think about it?
Exactly.
really
Well,
good.
so he talked about Jeremiah and the kings of Judah there. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? That gives us so much insight into the fact that if we're going to be honest, my heart is deceitful. And so it will become my default at times to try and make a case for what I want. It may not be what God wants, but it's what I feel. Well, my heart's going to deceive me, and if I can't acknowledge that, then I'm at danger of making really bad decisions. What's our next question, Pastor John?
Yeah, so the next question is the legacy question, which is, I love this because I'm a huge story person, but the question is, what story do I want to tell? And so I think as a church, what story do we want to tell? I think that's something that's challenging for us.
Well, I think it's not just, the way he talked about it in the book is it's not just what we want to tell, it's what will be told by others after we're gone. He talked a lot about, he mentioned the idea that our private decisions don't remain private. And even at a church, when we're long gone, what are they going to say about what the church looked like while we were here? The decisions we made that we thought were private or, that'll never come out. It's going to come out. And so, again, what story do we want to tell?
And I think it's good. And one of the things that, church-wise is we're, while God may keep us here for 5 years, for 10 years, whether it's people or staff members or whatever, it may be for 20 years, but at some point, we're not going to be here forever. And so be thinking about the story, the legacy, as he said it, that we want is really important to be thinking about, because at some point you are going to be gone. And so what do you want that story to be told about?
And the decisions we make are writing that story. I think he talks about Joseph a lot. And, was Joseph thinking when he was going through these experiences, what are people going to say about me? No, he was just choosing to make good decisions as he went through, not thinking of the consequences, but thinking, what's the right thing to do? What's the best thing to do?
Right. He refers to focalism, or anchoring, as we call it in counseling circles, where you get focused on something, and it begins to become the reality of, and it drives you to make decisions that are bad. As a parent, your kid leaves their shoes out in the middle of the room, and suddenly I'm like, well, they didn't do this, so they're being disrespectful. They're not honoring their mom. They're not following rules. They're clearly not going to get their homework done. They're going to end up taking drugs, and they're going to end up living on the street. And any parent, has had those moments when you carry something to a crazy extreme because you feel like, well, if people see my child misbehave in this store, everyone's going to think I'm a horrible parent. They're probably going to call DCFS. I'm going to get arrested in the parking lot. We go to these wild places because we focus on a moment of something that's happening, and we make that the entire reality, which is really, really dangerous, especially when we're making decisions. And I think, do you want the story to be, and this is it for leadership, I think the key question is, do you want the story to be about my greatness or God's greatness? And there are lots of churches with leaders who want it to be the story of their greatness. The joke that I make around here is, I know lots of people who want a building on campus named after them or something like that. For me, if someone ever makes that recommendation around here, let's just make it a memorial urinal somewhere or something, okay? And especially in this day and age where things are going bad and they're taking down statues and we got to change the name of this school. It's like, I don't want there to be a story at some point and be like, well, Jeff wasn't as good as we thought he was. And for someone to go, well, it's just a urinal in his honor. We can let that stay. It seems fitting. I think that we need to figure out what is our story we want to tell. We want to tell the story of God's goodness over time. And in order to do that, it forces us to make different decisions than I would if it's about making us look good, or even if it's about building up Waterbrook.
So I got a question. So, and this is kind of maybe to look backwards. And one of the things he said was, if you look in 10 years, and so as a parent, the example he uses of, if I want in 10 years, my daughters will be 17 and 12. And if what's my goal there? If it's my goal to say, I want my kids just to hang out with me, to enjoy being around me, then how do I get there? And across the next 10 years, how y'all have both been at Waterbrook for a very long time. How have you seen decisions in the previous 8-10 years that got us to where we're at today that may not have been what y'all thought at the time, but you thought, okay, let's look ahead 10 years and how has that story kind of played out? Does that make sense?
Well, I would say it's in the DNA of who we are. First of all, the fact that we give 10% of our missions, of our general giving goes to missions. And especially during this pandemic when churches have had economic struggles, one of the first things they cut is missions. And because it's in what we do, it's in our policies, that we take 10% off the top and we give that to missions right away. And that doesn't change. It keeps us connected to something we say is valuable. That we've made a decision that says what we believe, we're going to make sure we practice it, so that all these years later, that's not changed. And no matter how finances work, it doesn't change our commitment to that principle. I think that is one of those things that's really important.
Yeah, that's a really good example to say, okay, what is something that people will tell us, say that they know about Waterbrook, the decision from the very beginning to say 10% of giving will go to missions. That's a story we want told about us. That's a legacy that we want to live.
Right.
One of the things that I got from it, of this chapter, was he said that obey God and leave all the consequences to him. If God tells you to run your head through a brick wall, start running and trust God to make a hole. That ultimately, if the legacy we want to leave is obedience to God, then let God decide the consequences. Let God decide the outcome is what I kind of took from that. And that's hard to do, but if that's the story I tell, then no matter how that includes or doesn't include me in the end, is worth it because it's God's story.
Right. So when we had very, very young children, I was starting to travel a lot, and especially doing children's ministry conferences and doing a lot of workshops and sessions. And it was a good career trajectory for me. And I came home, and it was in the middle of a Chicago winter, and we had gotten something like 21 inches of snow while I was in Southern California. And my wife was dealing with 2 young kids and all this, and she said to me, I think we need you more right now at home than the world needs you as an expert in something. And basically, I canceled, and I stopped doing that, and for several years, I didn't do that. And it really hurt my heart, John, in answer to your question. It felt like, but God was doing this. God was blessing this. This was the direction he was taking me. And yet, by doing that, and my wife, who doesn't make many demands, I just knew that this had to come from God, that she was serious. This was a legitimate request. And that I look back now, and that God has opened, and when I travel now, and the places where I get to go and teach and do things, I'm like, God restored a lot of what I thought I was giving up. And that's just going to end it. That was the time when the iron was hot, and that's when I should have gone. Actually, God completely changed the influence I have and what I now do by allowing that moment to die. And I appreciate, he says, I won't lie to myself even when that's the other one. I will decide to tell a story I'm proud to tell and not decide anything that makes me a liar for life. Yeah. I think that's so important. What's the next question?
Yeah. People are going to be shocked that we're going to be running behind here pretty soon. So the next question is the conscience question. And I really, really enjoyed this chapter. Is there a tension that deserves my attention?
Yeah. So, of course, the biblical story is of David when he's in the cave and King Saul comes in, who's trying to kill David, and David had the opportunity to kill him and goes, wait, no, this is God's anointed, and I'm not going to take advantage of this situation because I'm going to let God work this out. And, of course, his men around him disagreed with him, and it would have made David's story much simpler when we go back to the last question. But David felt the tension of that moment I'm not going to take the life of this man who is my king, even though he wants to kill me, because God anointed him. Well, God anointed me also, but I'll wait for God's timing. God will raise me up at the right time, and in fact, he did. What a powerful illustration of this. Is there a tension that deserves my attention? If I go to do something and suddenly there is the voice in the back of my head, you need to stop and listen to it.
Yeah, he says kind of let that tension boil up.
Right.
And, really speak what it needs to speak.
Yeah, if you feel that hesitation, allow it to speak to you. Now, people would say, but I'm maybe some people are slow to move anyway, and they need to be prompted, and I understand that. But when there is a legitimate hesitation, and I have learned this, my wife, is the voice of the Holy Spirit. If my wife says something, she's almost always right. And let me just say for purposes, because she's probably watching today, she's 100% of the time right. But she has a perspective I don't. And what I learned is when I minister to people, years standing in lobbies as a pastor, and my wife as a pastor's wife standing next to me, I would say, so how are you doing today? And I would hear, I'm doing great, things are going really well, thanks. And people would walk out the door. And I go, and my wife would say, well, how do you think they're doing? I went, they're great. They just said they're great. And she would go, I don't think so. Because she would pick up cues. Did you see how they were fidgeting? Did you see how they looked down when they were? She would pick up clues that I didn't, that brought to light things that I didn't see.
I think we're just kind of clueless to that.
Which is always possible.
Not me, of course.
Right? No.
But we are prone to believe bad information if it gives me the confirmation bias that I want. That I'm not looking for someone to contradict what I think. I'm looking for someone to confirm what I think. And so when I feel that tension, instead of blowing by it and ignoring it, to stop and go, I wonder why I feel this way. I wonder why there is something that makes me uncomfortable in this moment.
Right.
Often the Holy Spirit.
And he's not asking us to, in his book, he's not saying, oh, well, you always need to take that route, but you need to listen for it. It's like our emotions. Sometimes our emotions may lie to us, but we need to listen, and at least process what they're telling us and find out, is that legitimate? Is it something that I'm missing?
Well, and as a church, again, to kind of take it back to church, I think in each of our ministries and areas, we have people that are that person that we want around us to create tension. I know in the book, he really talked a lot about having friends in your life that do that. But as ministries, I've got a leadership team that I will take ideas to. And sometimes they reject those ideas. And I look at them like, you're not the pastor of this ministry, right? But that tension that they're creating in me is needed. And there have been times we've changed plan. We changed a summer event this summer of where we're going because of that tension that was created. And then in pausing, goes back to the first question, we realized, what we're going to get to in the last question, or the next one, which is the wise thing to do, and all those things played together to go, I think there's a better decision. But it started with that tension and listening and feeling that tension and pausing as a part of that tension.
You have to have people in your life that you trust. That's what it boils down to. There have to be people in your life that you trust if they say, I think this is a bad decision, that that they care about you, that they're not doing it because they don't care. They're saying that because they do care. And when you find that, and that's honestly what I feel in our church staff here at Waterbrook, I trust all of those team members. And if they question me or push back really hard on something, I know that it's not because they're my enemy, which is often where it pushes us when we're not being honest with this question. It pushes me to where I need to go. And when I know I can trust that person and that their concern is out of concern for me, then I know I need to listen. That next question, Pastor John.
So the next question is the maturity question. What is the wise thing to do?
And I like a quote he put in it is, don't settle for good, legal, permissible, acceptable, not prosecutable, or normal.
Right.
Well, and let me tell you,
wise.
We had an issue. We got an end-of-year gift in, a financial gift in, and we had just hit budget. And I said to Robin and Tracy were in the office, and I said, hey, let's hold on to that gift and let's put it into next year's because it'll help us start the year really good. And I knew the way we were ending, which was the 31st of December, ended like on a Saturday. And so the first was December 1st, which meant all the online giving, everything else was all going to be in the last year. And that first giving was going to be a really bad Sunday. And I went, let's just hold that over until the 1st, and then we'll deposit it, and that will give us a good start to the year. And I literally got in my truck, and I drove about 2 blocks, and I pulled over, and I called, and I went, I'm wrong. I'm wrong. Because what I'm displaying is the fact that I don't trust God to provide on January 1st. So we need to manipulate a little bit. And it wasn't necessarily illegal. It wasn't immoral. It was just in the moment I knew to exercise trust in God, we needed to let this gift go where it landed, and then we need to go ahead and trust Him. And I'll say, in answer to the earlier question, I question that still because January 1st we had a miserable offering. It was exactly as I expected. But I feel that we made the right decision. It's interesting when I called back, Robbins said, I think you're right. She wasn't questioning me in the moment and we were celebrating. It's what a great thing God has provided for us to start well. But as soon as I made that decision, she confirmed that, yeah, I agree with you. And I went, yeah, it was the right decision. And to stop in that moment and go, this is the wise thing to do. And it's the trustworthy thing to do. It's the legitimate thing to do that makes it right. So I think, wisdom, of course, be careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil.
Right. They're against us.
Yeah.
So expect that.
Yeah. One of the examples he uses is swimming in the ocean, and I really, appreciated this example that when you start out, because of the undertow and because of the current, it ends up pushing you sideways, and so you don't realize it often because you're just out there in the ocean having a good time, and then you look up and suddenly you're half a mile from where you started, and now you got to get to the beach and then walk all the way back down, and that's what culture does. And so if we don't, again, to kind of go back to some of the other things he said in the book, if we don't have people around us questioning that, if we're not living in the tension to the wise decision, it's the slow decisions over time that end up carrying us further away from what God wants. And I appreciate as a staff and as a leadership team of the elders that there's that questioning that allows us to go, okay, if we're off just a bit, it's that immediate turnaround and go, no, this is where we want to be, right in line with what God has planned for us and is doing for us with that. Did y'all have anything else on that?
No, let's do the last question.
All right, last question.
Wrap up here.
Last question, which is a really good one. What does love require of me?
At the end of the day, when I make a decision, it's not about preserving my legacy, about how I will look, what is best for me. It's how does this decision impact the lives of others? And especially as church leaders, we're called to be servant leaders. Jesus modeled this on the cross. He makes a decision for our benefit that is only pain for him. Of course, he also has the long-term perspective, which is it will allow us a reunited relationship with him. It will allow us to bridge the gap through his sacrifice. But when I make decisions that are all about me and what's best for me, I don't see that from a biblical perspective as a godly way to make decisions. Am I being loving in this decision, whether it's about my wife, my kids, a church staff, a ministry, my neighbors? Are we going to do this outreach moment? We do some things that are just time-consuming, that are laborious. I spend time dealing with people who are draining, but it's the loving thing to do. And we hope that we're all that way with our families, right? We probably aren't as much as we like to think we are. And we really need that within the church. Our witness and our legacy really, to me, hinges on that question. Are we doing the loving thing? Does this reflect Jesus? In a moment when we come back, I'll talk about trends and stuff. And what we find, I think I put it in the leadership handbook for our leadership team, one of the things that we find in Gen Z is they feel like they're always apologizing for the church. That they spend a lot of time saying, oh, well, that's not really what my church is like, or that, oh, I'm sorry that you were hurt by Christians this way. And if it comes down to, am I doing the loving thing? Jesus did a lot of loving things that religious leaders questioned. It didn't fit their box. But for Jesus, it was the loving thing to do.
Well, a quote that Andy mentioned in there was, Jesus never played the God card. He could have tried to motivate his disciples to just do what I want. I'm God, you're not. He could legitimately say that. Yeah. He didn't do that. You look at Philippians 2. It's his example to us, and it's not an example of he's God and we're not. It's the sacrifice that he made and the love that he displayed for us. And, he of anybody, he could have asked for us to obey him just because I said so. And that's not the motivation that he gives us. It's the example of love he sets for us.
Well, I think our Who's the One campaign this year is an example of that, where we need to be stretched beyond the formulas and the plans and the things that make me comfortable. I need to be stretched and go, no, who do I really care about that's outside the family of faith that I'm going to reach out to? You know what? I might have to get myself into a situation I'm not comfortable with to reach out to people who are far from God. And it starts, in our program this year, it starts with prayer and just being committed to praying every day for someone. And I have noticed as I've been doing that, I've been interacting and had some messages back and forth with a couple of my Hoosier One people that I'm praying for. I have more than one Hoosier One, by the way. But as I'm praying for them, I'm seeing God open opportunities, and I think it's because one of the things I'm praying is, God, help me love this person more and more so that I'm as burdened as you are with how separated they are from you. Yeah. And I think as God does that, it's fascinating. I was just wondering a couple weeks ago, I wonder if these opportunities have always been there. I've just been closed because I really wasn't asking to love this person more. When I head down that path, it changes my heart, and my heart starts to align with the heart of God. And God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son so that whoever believes in him will not perish. But God so loved the world. So here, there are the people who are going to accept Christ. But he died on the cross for people who will reject him. Mm-hmm. That changes my approach to love. That it changes what I think love is. It changes how I make decisions towards other people. When I go, well, that's a heathen. Well, that's someone who's not going to come to faith. Or, whatever it is. It changes my decision when I think, but is this loving, and am I communicating love to them in this decision? And as a church, we have to do that. And that's been part of our struggle this year in the pandemic, is how do we be loving to people? What a struggle that is. And it's been an exhausting dialogue because not everyone agrees on what is the loving thing to do. But I think, if we sat with Jesus and said, really, Jesus, what would you do? And again, it goes back to the first questions of, well, I'm going to make something that's not theology, when it would be simply answered if I just went back to, no, really, what's the loving thing to do?
Whether we get anything out of it or not. God has a way of teaching us through those. I think of something we've done over the years as a church is our Give It Away offering, which started with where we just took the last offering we had of the year and said,
which is often our biggest offering,
often our biggest offering, and we said, we're going to give it away to things that don't benefit us as a church. And I think we as a church, as a leadership team, we learned that we may not see the return on that, but we did see a return. I mean, it changes us. It allows us to trust God, and when we see him do things that we didn't plan for, we didn't expect, we learn from that.
That's
it teaches
good,
us
Dan.
love.
I appreciate that so much. We're going to take a break here because we are scheduled to take a break. The live stream won't end. There will be a countdown and some video stuff that will happen here.
Live stream won't end.
The live stream will not end.
Will not end.
Yeah, so
yeah.
don't click off or
Don't
turn anything
click off of it. We're
just
still
going to
here.
take a few minutes of break. We'll be back at
3 minutes. So we're going to be back in 3 minutes.
We're going to be back at. Hold on. We're going to be back in.
The countdown's 3.
No.
10:57.
Oh, at 10.
Yeah. No, we're
10:55,
behind. We're behind.
so it's supposed to be
We're going to be
10:55.
back.
Let's say we're going to be back. Okay, in.
The countdown's 3 minutes. We're going to be back
Okay.
in 3 minutes. In that 3 minutes, go to the bathroom, get some water, whatever you need to do, but also be commenting on the post. We're going to do a prize drawing this afternoon, later this afternoon in our second session
I'll tell you
for
what,
people that have commented.
I have a gift card right here. When we come back, someone who's commented already, and by the way, in case that comment, because I have a text here from Dave Burchett, who has already photoshopped while we were talking a picture
of a
that
urinal.
says to honor the legacy of Jeff Denton, the sign over a urinal.
Yes.
So that doesn't count, but
That's
if
our
you're
elders.
but everybody else.
But if you have, from the book, if you've read it, or from the conversation we're having, if something has struck you and you're like, well, this is interesting, I need to think about this more, or you have something to add to it, comment that right now, and we're going to throw those names in. When we come back, from someone who's made a comment, we'll give away a prize real quick.
That sounds good to me.
We'll do that as soon as we come back. So don't go anywhere. Stick around. Get that coffee refilled, or use the bathroom. I don't know. We want to say that.
We'll try and mute our mics before we go to the bathroom.
Yeah, we'll try.
We'll be back in just a second with a discussion about how the church is changing and what's going to happen in the post-quarantine church in America and in the world. We'll be back.
All right, so it is time to give away some gift cards, and if you've been commenting, we appreciate it. We've got comments on YouTube and on Facebook. I had some guys choose some numbers earlier, but I saw more comments, so I'm going to have the two guys up here choose a number between 1 and 7. I know what numbers they go with people here, so Jeff, for who you love, what number do you choose between 1 to 7?
And by the way, when we give away gift cards at our leadership weekend, we actually, just so people know, we allow staff to win those as well.
Yeah, Pastor Ewan is very excited.
I'm sure she is.
She hasn't commented yet, but she doesn't know. She doesn't know she was
available. You need to let us know you're watching today. So between 1 and 7, okay, I'll pick 6.
You will pick 6, which goes to Mr. Jacob Day, gets a $10. You know what? I love Jacob's wife more than him. So Jacob gets a $15 Bath & Body Works gift card that can go to Cassie Day right there.
He's excited already.
I know Jacob, and he has very tender hands and stuff. He's using that for himself.
He does. All right, so Dan, then you choose a number between 1 and 7.
One more gift card to give away.
4.
Okay.
Number 4 is on Facebook here. So went to YouTube first. This is a Facebook comment, which goes to Mr. Jim Boswell, who commented on Facebook about it. So Jim, $10 gift card to Sonic. Whenever you are here next, sir, you can grab that.
Are there any comments online, Pastor John, that we should interact with, or that...
Well, Teresa Nash, who will be up talking this afternoon, our We School director, said that when everyone, the quote that she liked was, when everyone and everything is drifting along at the same rate in the same direction, it's easy to be lulled into believing you are standing still. Without stationary reference points, it is impossible to ascertain where you are and where you aren't and where you ought to be. So I really like that comment there.
That's excellent. That's good stuff. So again, I want to talk in this next segment for about the next 30 minutes. I want to talk about changes in the church. This is always part of our retreat weekend, and I spend a lot of time in the month of January pulling together facts and details. This year has been a very different year. Everything we know about church has changed. It is radically different. Now, here's what we know. It takes about 21 days to begin a new habit, to start to build something new into your life. There's actually a statistic that a lot of people know that. What they don't know is for something to occur as what we call a natural habit takes about 66 days. So about 2 months. And if you do something on a daily or regular basis for 2 months, then it becomes automatic, and that you don't have to think about it like you do in that first 21 days or so where you're trying to make it a habit. And so if it takes 66 days to make an automatic habit that becomes ingrained in who you are and you don't even have to think about it anymore, imagine a year of pandemic and not being in church, not hugging people, not interacting with people face to face, that this has created new habits within the church. So there are some basic truths that I do want to point out because of that. Number one, not all changes have been bad. As much as we want to complain about everything and we don't like it and change that has happened, not all changes have been bad, and that's really important to note. Secondly, not all things are going back to normal. Some of those changes that have been good are good and should be here to stay. But also, some of the changes have occurred, and we have no control over making things go back to normal. We would like to say we will, and this is good discipleship. I will make people go back to normal. We can't do that. First of all, that's not even how God works in our lives. And so for us to say that is bad leadership. But the third thing is that there has been accelerated church closures over the last year. Churches and ministries who have gone out of existence, who have died. And that for many of those, research shows, they were churches that were already struggling, were already headed a bad direction. And what happened was, because they were making choices that weren't leading them towards growth to begin with, so what happened during the pandemic is it accelerated their demise. It accelerated people who were walking away from church. And we can see that as a positive thing if we use that to help us understand trends so we know where we're going. So church growth expectations by pastors. This is a research that was done, I believe by Barna did this. Pastors were asked at the end of 2020, actually in the fall, they were asked, what do they believe will happen to attendance in their church?
13% of pastors said they believe their church will grow after the pandemic. 13% of pastors think their church will grow after the pandemic. 33% believe that their church will get back to the same number, the same size. 49% of pastors say they believe that their attendance has decreased and will stay that way. That is discouraging to me as a pastor. And that is these are people who are hopeful about their churches, and yet this is the response that they're giving. The average church, as we've come back from the pandemic, according to Tony Morgan's Q3 Unstuck Church report, he's found that among churches that were surveyed, in-person attendance is 36% of what it was pre-COVID. That's the percentage of people who come back. The churches in America are somewhere between that 30 and 50% is what the average church is experiencing right now. Great churches that say they're doing great, are getting 70% of their pre-COVID attendance in person. Think about that. A 30% decline is what is good right now. A 30% decline is what we're celebrating. When a year ago from today, a year in the past, if you'd have said to me last February, hey, we'll be happy with just a 30% decline in attendance. We were in the process, and last year at our leadership retreat, we had decided we're going to put into place a new building team because we were looking at we need to get the next building going. We need to start this because of growth and service sizes, and and we've been on trajectory for growth. I showed the elders earlier this morning that our budget has doubled in a decade, more than doubled in a decade. That what our attendance has done. That we're just on a direction that's upward. And if you'd have said to me last February, no, stop the building plans, you're going to stop everything like that. And by the way, most of the year, you're going to have no one in your buildings. And you're going to close down some of the buildings on campus, and they'll be closed for months. I would have said that's ridiculous. Unless the rapture is occurring and Jesus is taking us home, we will not let that happen. And yet it did. And that's the new reality. What's happening is most churches are trying to straddle between online and in-person ministry. And studies show that when church members are asked, their churches say they're failing at both. As churches are trying to straddle between the two,
it's hard.
That most churches are failing. And we, actually through much of last year, we made some decisions like, no, we were just really boring down into the online stuff because we recognized very early on, after doing, making a decision every week kind of a thing, that it was killing us, and we were being ineffective at what we were trying. And we said, okay, we just have to say we're online, and that's what we are, and we're going to figure this out. And that helped us. I think it helped us find, okay, here's how we can minister to people. We can't do everything we have done, but we can do some things well. If we're measuring success in church by in-person attendance, then we're failing. And we probably will be for years. Experts are agreeing that if we do return to previous in-person attendance numbers, it will take somewhere between 2 to 10 years. Wow. And some of that is because churches are already realizing that people are uncomfortable with being in a room with large groups of people. A year ago, I would have said, and maybe said at our leadership retreat a year ago, when we're full, it creates energy, it creates excitement, and people want to bring their friends to a place that's really full. That's not the same anymore. I realize there are some people who do and still want to engage in that, but most people are not rushing back to a full location. And that's a big deal. So if we're going to go back and figure out how do we measure success now in what we're doing, because it's a different game. And let's just be honest. Can we justify a youth pastor on staff?
Yes.
When we,
I don't know if they can see me on screen yet, but yes.
Let me say
No, but
this.
it's a good question.
Can we justify a youth pastor on staff when we're not doing we didn't do ministry trips last summer. Some of the ministries for this summer are still up in the air with organizations and groups. Can we justify youth ministry when we aren't having all the Sunday morning classes that we were when, student ministry even midweek, which is I feel the need to be encouraging, but the reality is it's nothing that it was.
Right.
It's not near what
Right.
it was. Does it still justify having a youth pastor on staff? Can we justify having a children's ministry pastor on staff when we're not even having babies in the nursery now? No one's bringing their baby to the nursery. Even those who come, they keep their baby, that no one's putting their newborns in the nursery. And can we justify a children's ministry pastor when we have smaller amounts of kids and we're only having kids ministry 1 of 2 hours on Sunday morning? Can we justify a children's pastor in that kind of a thing? Can we justify a missions pastor when we haven't done any mission trips in a year? You know, can we justify, because I feel like we need to be fair to all staff, can we justify 2 teaching pastors when we have a very small amount of people here on Sunday morning? So now that I've made all of our staff members,
My job hasn't been touched. Yeah.
we still need an elder chairman. I got to do that. But most churches are putting a majority of their money, their staffing, what they do, into things that are not being effective right now. That's just a reality. And we have to wrestle with that because that's not a long-term sustainable approach. Things have changed, and we have to figure out what that means. Where's the church? You know, I would suggest that we need to reevaluate how we measure success and how we measure value in success. In other words, are smaller numbers of students valuable if we're reaching them in new ways? If we're reaching out to, and we're supporting families in different ways.
A different way to measure, a different metric to look at.
We probably need, what I'm getting from the research is if I was to say today, the way we need to measure things is by engagement instead of attendance, spiritual growth, and outreach beyond the walls differently than how many people are coming in all the time now. That's probably how we need to figure out how we measure. Even in this year. So where is our church family and when are they coming back? You know, that's a key question. Well, it depends on the generation, and in this chart that we have right here, what you see is that, and let me just say this, Gen Z, of course, is those born between 97 and about 2012. That's Gen Z, and they're just graduating college, basically, right now. They're young adults, just entering into life. Millennials born between 1980 and 1996, so the 80s and 90s babies are millennials.
That's me, Dan.
Okay, that's you. Gen Xers between 65 and 1980, that's you and I. We're
Some of us are older.
we're roughly.
I
like to say
we can straddle both.
I'm an old.
Yeah.
I'm an old.
Depends on
Gen
where you
Xer.
put that lower date.
Yeah. There are some of those charts that bump me into
yeah.
a different category, but I'm going to go with Gen Xers, and then Boomers from the 40s, into the mid 60s are Boomers. Now, on this chart, what you'll see here is that 41% of Gen Z and 42% of Millennials. That's the percent that want to go back to primarily in-person church. That is not even a majority of those generations who say right now, I want to be back at church, I want to be meeting in person. And actually only 40% of Gen Xers, those who are in their 50s, 40s and 50s, only 47%, less than half of them say, that's what I want primarily to be back in church. That there is a change. 70% of Boomers do. They want to be back in church. Now, who makes the decision in churches? What do you think is the average age of our leadership team?
Probably
the
Boomers.
Guess, but
the Boomers.
Dave Burchett just joined the elder. That just bumped up.
Bumped up the age. Yeah.
No, the average senior pastor in America is 57 years old. So in that category, and leadership teams are primarily older. And so the people making decisions about what we need to do are the older categories. And what I'm saying is there is a disconnect between what we think and what we want and what everyone younger than us thinks. Now, even in my generation, still less than 50% say, I want to be in person as my primary worship. The issue is even, but between the Gen Zs and millennials and the boomers, there's a 30% point difference between how they want to function and interact with church. And we're talking about, this survey was done with people who say, yes, I want to be part of a church. I am an active, growing, engaged Christian, and yet this is what they're expecting for church. Let me say, I took my family to a movie theater at the end of the year because I am pro-business, I want to help, and we'd not been to a movie all year, and I said, okay, let's go see a movie. I want to support this. So my kids were home for Christmas, my young adult kids, so we all were going to go. Bought the tickets online, big stuff on the website, how safe they're being and everything else. And as we're walking in, I realized how uncomfortable I was. Now, this was important for me because when I come to church, I'm comfortable here because I know all the precautions we take. I know how much we clean. I know what we do. I'm wearing a mask all the time except when I'm up on stage. So I know all the precautions. I feel safe here. I knew I needed to go to a place where I wasn't in control and could experience what other people feel when they come into church. As we're going into that movie theater, I realized I felt uncomfortable. And I was judging everyone I saw and every employee and everything going, oh, that makes me uncomfortable. When we sat down in our seats, I said to my family, if anyone had said, and one of my family members said, I almost said I don't want to come in here. I said, if you just said that outside the theater, I was prepared to go. Then we're not. If anyone was uncomfortable and expressed it, fine, I'll eat the cost of those tickets and we'll go. Because I was starting to feel uncomfortable as we were approaching the theater. We went in, we sat down. I bought back tickets, so they were against the wall. There was no one behind us. And in one of those theaters where there's now, it's loungers, so there's 5-6 feet even between me and the next seat, and the seats right in front of you are blocked off anyway, the way the movie theaters are doing it. We went in and sat down, and I kept saying, but they're doing all these extra cleaning things. When we went to sit down, in my cup holder was trash. In one of my other family members was a napkin wadded up. And I went, I'm done. We watched the movie. I didn't touch the cup holder or whatever. And I'm not overly anxious about those things. I just went, no, it's not completely clean. And I may have found the 2 pieces of trash that were in that whole theater, probably. But I've not been back to a movie theater since. And I wrote the company to say, I just need you to know why. That this was a big deal to me as someone who had no control over the environment and what I felt when I was in there. And I went, I'll say it, I got a big TV at home, I'll watch movies at home, I'm good, I don't need to do this. As someone who wanted to support. That's the reality we need to do. Those of us who are comfortable coming into church don't realize what it's like for everyone else who's coming in. And people who aren't here and don't know everything we're doing behind the scenes. And so I would say there's this generational difference. Those of us who are older who are trying and really want to be back, those who are younger are more prone to say it's not worth it. It's not worth the stress, the anxiety, the discomfort, whatever it is. And I can get ministry in different ways now. So the church is still out there. They've just left the building, Elvis. I mean, that's really sort of the reality of what's happened. In-person worship and church activities are not going away, but they're not going to be playing the same role this year and next year and maybe for years ahead. And I think that's something we have to really take into consideration. And this isn't just the result of the pandemic. It's just been accelerated by the pandemic because this is a generational difference that was building, obviously, because it's generational. What has happened is God has allowed us by the pandemic to see what was coming and to accelerate it so we can go, oh, we need to deal with this and we need to figure out what church looks like now, and has given us the opportunity to consider that. By the way, only 21% of church leaders agreed that they have a well-defined digital ministry strategy to engage people who are outside the church, which means 80% of churches don't have a strategy. And I would say for us, we got thrown into stuff. And we have some broadcasting legends in our church who helped us up our game. We have a great tech director who helped us get equipment. We have Pastor John who oversaw a lot of what we were doing. And we have a phenomenal team, a tech team, who's made this happen, and a staff who's been very flexible. But I wouldn't say we developed a fully formed, here's our digital online strategy. We instead just sort of got pulled along with the tide.
We kind of made it up as we went along.
We did. And so let me say this. Jesus didn't say, attend me. He said, follow me. And that I wrote that in my journal recently, and that's just been sort of rolling around in my head about what potentially that means. That Jesus said, follow me. He didn't say, attend me. And The reason people followed Jesus is because he was engaging with them. And so what I've come to is, so it's really about engagement. It's not about attendance. I have opinions, I have feelings, but it goes back to those earlier questions. I got to be careful not to make my opinions and my feelings and the way I've always experienced it a theologically right answer, an absolute from God. So I think there's a lesson for all of us. Attendance used to be the way we engaged. That's how we get people here, we engage with them. Well, the internet came along somewhere in the last few years and has actually changed that. By the way, if you're prone to say people will come back, look at this chart. This is declining church attendance that was happening prior to the pandemic. This survey is from 2003 to 2020, just ahead of the pandemic hitting, and you'll see the trends. Over 17 years, there's been a church attendance decrease in all age demographics. Now, what's happened since then is the pandemic accelerated it, which to me, let me say, from a leadership perspective, is not all a bad thing. It forced us to see something that was like the frog in the kettle that was slowly happening. What we got is we got this glimpse of, it all fell off here, but it was already trending this way, and people are okay with falling off. And we went,
we got to do something.
We got to do something. We got to figure this out now. Most churches have adapted. They have not innovated. Most churches have adapted. They've not innovated. And I would put us in that category. I'd like to think we've tried to be innovative at times. We really have tried to be creative. And we did. We created a children's program, that we were doing at one point. That we were doing some amazing things. We did the pregame show, which that was something no one else was doing. I mean, we have been innovative. Pastor Don was bringing kids in to record kids' songs so we could put in our worship. That's innovative. But most of what we did, and I will say this because we've slowly been pulled back to trying to do it the way we've always done it. So that wasn't innovation necessarily. That was adaptation for a moment. So what we and everyone realized is that in-person churches don't translate well online. And so we figured that out very quickly, and we made changes to it. Okay, so we're going to shorter messages. Less songs, more familiar songs. Because when you're sitting on your couch, you'll hum along with something you're familiar with. If I hear a song on the radio I know, I'll sing along with it without even realizing it. If it's something new, I won't. So messages at 30 minutes are a long time to sit. Listening to this right now, people have gotten up. They've gone to do other things. They're roaming around. More videos. More faces on the screen. So we realized, okay, let's get other people to do the announcements. Let's get other people to, we had our missionaries all record greetings at the beginning of services. Because if we're not able to be together, we need people to see one another and see there are other people who call Waterbrook home other than the three of us who are on the stage on a Sunday morning. But we're driven, just like every church in America is, we're driven by the desire to get back to the way it was. Because that's what I was trained. That's what I'm comfortable with. It's familiar. It's easier than all this making up stuff and all this effort it takes. And so that drives us that direction. I'm not convinced, and statistics seem to say that's not how your church will grow in the next year, by trying to go back to what was. And again, when we go back to, but let's take the older crowd, most of us in leadership, well, this is what we need to do is go back to this. And I'm telling you, that's not how we're going to reach the next generation. Even people who are here and are bleeding out because they're feeling less connected and they don't have the drive like we do. And that can make us obsolete, but not, I would say not quickly obsolete, because we have some good dedicated people here. And so we will be the slow trend if we don't figure out how to adapt, if we don't figure out how to be innovative, because it will just happen because we have good people. So we'll survive for a while. What's easy for me? Being with people, teaching, counseling, meeting. What's difficult for me? Talking to that camera and trying to pretend there's someone on the other side of that. And I'll be really honest with you, even when I see numbers and that people are watching on a Sunday morning, whatever, it's hard for me to look at that and think of the person who's sitting on their couch. That's just harder. It's more difficult. It's much easier for me to interact with people here in the room. I told there are a couple staff members on campus, and I told them, stay in your offices for the morning sessions. And part of that was because I didn't want to be tempted to interact with anyone in the room, because I'm talking to that crowd. I know theologically there's an unsaved world out there, and we got to figure out how to get to them. But the saved world is also out there now. They're not in here. So there are believers who are out there, and what are we good at? We're good with missions. We're good around here. We're good with trips to Israel. We're good with trips to go teach in Hungary. We're good with trips on mission to Colombia. We're good at a lot of things. This is different. Talking to a camera, setting ourselves up, doing things differently is not what we were good at. And it is a challenge. But I've got to get that same mindset for what we're good at to what we need to do to reach others right now. And you know what businesses have suffered during the pandemic? Restaurants. Mm-hmm. You've seen restaurants, and they're closing. Mm-hmm. A lot of restaurants have failed because of the pandemic. You know who's thrived during the pandemic?
Amazon.
Restaurants. Amazon. No. I'm going to tell you statistically. So here's the interesting thing. What restaurants have thrived?
Sonic,
Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
Why? What do they have that other restaurants didn't? What did McDonald's not have prior to the pandemic? A mobile app, an online ordering. Mm-hmm. And they saw your Chick-fil-A's and your Sonics who already had that structure in place. Prior to the pandemic, occasionally, probably in the year leading up to it, if we had a bunch of people on campus and I'm like, hey, let's go get some drinks from Sonic, I would say to Pastor John, hey, youth pastor, who has on your phone, you have an app on there, and I know we can get those drinks at half price. Go ahead and do that and order them on your little phone thing, because I'm not about to put my credit card on my phone, because I know what happens. Yeah. Well, what happened was I now have all of those apps on my phone.
And you know how to use them now, too. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, during the storm, I pulled up to the carry out, the parking spot for Chick-fil-A, and I got on the app to order because I wasn't getting in the line for the drive-thru, and it said, the outside delivery because of inclement weather is not happening. And I went, wait, I can't order on my... How am I supposed to do this? Because it doesn't take long for us to adapt. And now I know. And now if we're doing something, I'm like, okay, hey, what's everybody want for lunch, from McAllister's? We're going to order it. And I'll get it ordered and go pick it up or get it delivered. We've adapted. And the restaurants that have thrived are the ones who had that in place, and the ones that were smart and saw the danger quickly got it in place. And so I think some of that is, they changed how they interacted with their customers and how their customers interacted with them. Well, what has the church done to figure that? What are we doing to figure that out? Because I'll tell you what, mobile apps aren't going away for restaurants. I'm always going to order from Chick-fil-A on here. It's just easier. And I get points, and then I get free stuff afterwards. So it's a win-win all the way around. But I'm not in the... one researcher challenged... I'm going to say some people have embraced it, others have resisted it. I went in, we just recently had to get... I was told I had to get a new phone because someone else on staff Tracy needed the old one. Hers had stopped working for office stuff. So mine had to go there, so I needed a new one. And John said, well, you need this particular one because it has better camera and we're doing so much video stuff, you need this. We go in. First of all, it's a monstrosity now. This is what I get when I let the youth pastor tell me what I need. But we went in, and I'm standing there, and Pastor John is at the table, and the employee of the phone store is on the other side of the plexiglass of the table, and we're all standing there, and they're transferring we have all these devices, and everything's being transferred, and this is being moved to this number, and this is being, and did you back up your data? Yes, because I'm smart. I'm middle-aged, but I'm smart. I knew to back up my data before I showed up. And he's like, well, now just download it on there. I'm like, but it doesn't give me an option to tell it what my account is. I don't know how to get it on there. And I don't know he's like, okay, so bump it on your hip and then swipe up and then lick it twice. And I didn't understand what he was telling me to do. I'm like, there's no buttons on here anymore. I don't know what to do.
Where's the home button?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I finally said, I just slid it across the desk to them and I went, just do it, please.
I don't have the fingerprint or the face. Yeah.
I said, just do it because I don't understand what you're telling me to do. It's to embrace that and go, I'm not I'm not going to be I told Pastor John, listen, I was programming my parents' VCR to stop blinking noon before you were ever thought of.
We know what a VHS tape is.
There was a time when I was at the top of the technologically, and I'll tell you what, if I went home, I would Google it and I would finally figure it out. But it's easier for me to go, just do it. I had to hand my phone to my kids and go, yeah, download that thing, do it. I had to say to my son, I went, I'm standing in front of the TV going, I'm just swiping. And he said, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm trying to get this up on the, because I know there's a casting thing. And basically, I don't know what I'm doing. But I'm just, Siri, throw it up on the TV.
How many TVs are cracked?
Right.
Throw it to the TV.
Right. And we have to figure out, those changes aren't bad or evil. They're just different. And we have to recognize that. One researcher challenged pastors with this: treat your online ministry like it's a real ministry, because it is. Treat your online people like they're real people, because they are. Wow, that hit me. And I went, okay, so that's the church lobby has moved. People used to walk into church, and their first experience was when they walked in the door. Now no one walks in the door of this church. Our lobby is now in their home, because they've already watched services. They've already checked out our website. I don't go any place where I haven't looked it up online to begin with. So our lobby is no longer our lobby. Their first experiences happened before they came in the door. We have to change our thinking to that and realize how important that is. People, it does mean, what it could mean is that people will engage faster, and I think we're seeing this some. When people walk in the door, just recently, someone who showed up and said, I introduced myself, and they went, oh yeah, I've been watching you since like last March. They said, this is my church home. You've never walked in the building here until today. What do you mean we're your church home? I've never met you, but he knew me. And that's happening now, and it's changed how we relate to the people who are out there. Most people are wanting connection and transformation, and that's a good thing. So, attendance at services may be small for a while. That's okay. We have more multi-site locations. If you had said to me, hey, we're going to have church locations, there will be Waterbrook services happening at 100 locations on a Sunday a year, I'd have laughed at you. Well, we do now. We have all these multi-site locations that are now happening. We're being pushed into uncomfortable discussions and ideas because the world is changing, but it always has been changing, so that's okay. The church a year from now will probably look different from today, and that's okay, because the church today looks radically different than it did a year ago, and that's okay, because we're still the bride of Christ. That doesn't change. My theology doesn't change. Maybe how we do things, and it may force some of us who are I'm really comfortable with what I know, it may force me to do some things. I love listening, when I had power this week, listening to my record albums. So my K-Tel, you will remember this, my K-Tel, the very best of country music, with songs like by Roy Clark and Billy Crash Craddock. I don't think you can sing Rub It In, you remember that song? But I mean, all my, Waylon and Willie, Good-Hearted Woman. I'm listening to this because this feels good to me. It's comforting to me, and so I put it on my home office with my record player and I listen to my old K-Tel country music. And for those of you who think I'm an absolute heathen, I also have my Gaither record that I was listening to, signed by Gary McSpadden, by the way. I have my Gaither record that I'm listening to because this comforts me. And this is worship from, I sit, and it's very natural. But I also have to recognize, and we can argue about, records are making a comeback, right? There are some records no, they're not. Because you know what's hard? After the record ends, I have to get up and go to the record player and flip
There's
the
no
thing
repeat,
over.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So there's a measure of comfort, but after I've listened to a couple records, you know what I do if I'm working in my home office? I just go ahead and switch digitally to my phone, and I listen to streaming because I will listen to what I want to listen to, and I don't have to. It is better. I can't take this with me when I go on a road trip. I can't listen to this.
You don't have a
car.
Walkman?
I can't take these with me when I go out with the dog in the morning. I can listen to sermons on my phone. Waterbrook is having a whole new moment, and it's all different, but it's not all bad necessarily. So I have to recognize this is comforting, this makes me feel good, this I enjoy, but even I admit, this isn't the way of the future. This is nostalgic. And so things are changing.
And it's a maturity thing for us, especially of the not so young generation, that we've got to recognize that.
Yeah. So I don't have applications beyond that because it's just different. And I think we're still in the midst of changing and these discussions are happening. And I want to applaud our church staff at Waterbrook who are doing an amazing job at being flexible. Our elders have been so supportive in the last year of saying, okay, what are we trying next? What are we going to do now? And what I'm trying to recognize now is our drive to try and make everything back to normal may not be where God is leading us. Mm-hmm. I think that when God does something so drastically, it changes the church all across the world, we might need to take another minute yet and go, okay, wait, what does need to change? And let's not go back so that we can get on that slow decline slide. Let's figure out how we engage, just like people wanted to engage with Jesus. Let's be the church that engages with people. Let's be leaders who engage with people and figure out how to do that so that they feel connected. And I think that's where the future is. So that'll be our challenge, I think, in the year ahead.
Two comments that we had online that I think we're struggling with as a staff is Michael Mankin said that relationships among Gen Z and millennials prior to COVID were already digital. And, it's certainly see it in our student ministry and within my own age group, is that texting is huge, right? That's their primary form of communication. The joke is always you have two kids sitting on a couch, they're texting each other right next to each other, right? But the reality is that's what it is. But then to challenge with that, and Don posted, our worship pastor, Don Moore, posted online that how do we also then balance, don't forsake the assembly of yourselves? Like, how do we balance the need? We know that the greatest need among Gen Z and millennials are these relationships, and they're longing for it, and they're missing it. How do we balance that need? And that's something that we're struggling with.
And I do think that what we have to acknowledge is that it's changed. Mm-hmm. It's changed. We have a generation now, the Gen Z, YouTube was introduced when the oldest members of that generation were 12 years old. They have known nothing other than being able to watch a video on demand. This generation, Pastor John, watches a movie on his phone. Mm-hmm. I'm like, a movie on your phone? That's why I have a giant TV in my house. I don't want to watch. And I'm having to acknowledge that my kids watch movies and TV from their phone. Now, can we change that? No, and I don't have to change that. I have to recognize they are native to something completely different. When I go to another country, I don't walk in to do missions and go, you're going to do it American style right here because this is how we do it and this is what's right. What I do is I need to figure out this culture. I need to figure out this language. I need to figure out how I reach these people. I walk in and there are places where I go around the world and I always travel with magic tricks. Gets great attention getters. As a guest speaker, I've walked in places and they've said, don't do a magic trick. We have cultural things that you cannot do that within the church. And I respect that. Right. Now, I can make a case for, no, this has a great illustration, it has a spiritual illustration, it will drive my sermon home, and everyone will walk out and remember this for maybe the rest of their lives. That's not my job in that moment. My job is to go, well, this is the culture that's here. And what I will do is drive them away from the truth I want to communicate. So it's more important that I understand the culture. So the problem is, you're right, and thank you, Pastor Don, is to say I've got to hold on to these things. I've got to tell people it's important we connect. We're about to have lunch here, and one of the things that I said is it is not an optional thing, is pastors and elders, we always do lunch together on our leadership retreat. We break into small groups, 2 or 3, and we have these little intimate lunches together. And I said, we got to do that. It's only 2 people, maybe 3 people, and we've got to do that because we can't not have some personal to all of this. Okay, I accepted that we needed to go to a different format to present all this year, but I won't give up that. I suspect that churches that are already growing in this are the churches who have created formats where they're saying worship at home and worship with people. And that's hard because we're trying to convince people who want to go back to the way it was. But I do suspect that there's some of that, accepting not everyone wants to be in a full room anymore of people. We might have to go to 8 services of a fourth of the people in here to make people comfortable. We might have to say, we'll do multi-site on the campus and we'll stream the service over. In other words, there are creative things we can do, because I agree, I don't want to give up, and I'm not going to give up the assembling of yourselves together, but there's nothing that says that has to be a Sunday morning. We're applying that to this, and I'm not sure that's it. That goes back to the engagement and people who follow Jesus. We've got to connect people together. It's why we're talking big about life groups right now, because I want everyone to get in a small group where we can get together with 3 or 4 couples or 6 to 8 individuals and go, this is a safe group in the pandemic to be with. We know that. I will be with these same people, and I will interact. It was so important to me. Our life group came and met underneath the canopies through the midst of summer when no one was getting together, and we sat in our lawn chairs 10, 12 feet away from each other. We have some people who were very high at risk just so we could be together, and that was important to my sanity. I think we can do things like that may meet what we need to do in the body of Christ that look different than what we were doing a year ago. I flew back a year ago with tickets already purchased for my next couple of trips, with plans for what was next. I've not left the United States in the last year. All the interaction I've done internationally has been online. Hate it. I don't like it. But I've impacted students in classes and encouraged pastors and missionaries. I just this week was talking to a missionary online, and I went, no, this is good. It's not what I want to do. I'd rather be in person and hug their neck and say, this will be okay, you're going to be good. But I'm finding ways to deal with it. That's what we got to do. And so I'm not willing to give up on the church. The church is still the church. They may have left the building, Elvis, but the church is still out there. And the world that we need to love is out there. So figuring out new ways to do that, that's why I'm excited. That's why I'm excited for what lies ahead. We're going to take a break now, and we're going to be back at 1 o'clock. I know I'm cutting short for pastors and staff who are...
You have another segment.
No.
Session 3?
Yeah, that's at 1 o'clock today.
Okay.
Right? Yes.
11:30 is what it says on...
No, that's lunch break at
okay.
11:30. I don't know what you're looking at, Pastor John.
The wrong one, clearly.
Wait, first of all, I'm just going to tell you, you're looking at online stuff. I have the print version here as an old guy.
See, there's my problem.
I have the print version that says we will be back. So this live stream is going to end. Now, if you want to text Pastor John or me, if you got some comments or questions about this is good stuff, and I appreciate the interaction about it. I appreciate you guys interacting with some of this. And I want us to be challenged. I'm not giving us answers. I'm giving us the challenge of how do we interact with this stuff. And whatever you lead, whatever ministry you are, or if you've got kids in your life, you're like, you got to deal with your kids differently than I dealt with my kids when they were little. You're dealing with your girls in a whole different realm than I am. I've been in countries, in third world countries, where they're able to get access to cheap cell phones and get online on the internet. And I've had to look at people who had no TV or electricity and say to them as parents, the kids you're dealing with now, you have no idea how their life has changed because they have access to this whole world. And you don't even understand it. And I would say that we're in the same boat here. We just feel more, I'm more, I can handle something. Not true. I need to recognize what I don't know and where my blind spots are, or I'm not going to reach the next generation. So, anyway, it's good stuff. So we'll be back at 1 o'clock. We'll be back live, and the whole staff will be here, distanced and moved around on the stage here. And we're going to talk about Waterbrook 101, what it means to be very specifically Waterbrook. We'll have others who will be joining us online for the live stream. And we're going to have a good session this afternoon talking about who we are as a church, because I don't think we can figure out how we do what we do and what can change unless we first anchor ourselves to what we are and what we know about ourselves, so then we can figure out what's flexible and how do we change. So we'll be talking about Waterbrook 101 this afternoon with the incredible Waterbrook staff that's here. After they all heard me talk about how their jobs may or may not be important, I may not be back here after lunch. So, yeah. So we will be back at 1. I mean, we have to run, and we all have different groups to get lunch. And so if we're not back exactly at 1 o'clock, we will be back closely to 1 o'clock. So please join us then. Dan, would you please close this time in prayer for us before we sign off here?
I'll be happy to. Let's go ahead and pray. Father God, we thank you for the anchor we have that is rooted in you and in your word. And we thank you that never changes. And in the world we live in, where the things we thought were stable and unchanging have just been taken from us and changed in ways we never even saw coming. And yet through it all, we know that you never change, and we rest in that, and we thank you for that. And Father, I pray that as we've been challenged here with just the idea that we have to do ministry in a totally different way than we've done it before, and that's okay. Father, help that to sink into us and help us to accept that challenge and to be innovative and not just adapt and not just seek to go back to the way things were. Father, help us to never lose our anchor in you and in the truth and veracity of your word, but help us to be willing to let go of those things that are not that. And give us creativity, give us just a unique mindset of being able to reach this culture for you. Thank you, Father. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. All right, you are dismissed for lunch. We'll be back at 1 o'clock here for our afternoon sessions.